Hi guys, I'm just going to quickly cover some of the main points from chapter 20 with you to help you out with your test that you will take starting today. You do get 2 attempts on your tests and you can start and stop them as many times as you would like. So you can try it with your PEST sheets and then go through and listen to this if you have other questions. So I'm going to click through very quickly. Not going to talk very long about anything because you've already looked through this. I just want to cover some main points. As I graded your PEST sheets, I realized there were some things that people might have had questions about. So in the 1920s, the World War I had ended. We were dealing with the impacts of that, and that was leading up, all of this stuff was leading up to World War II, basically. Prohibition banned the sale of alcohol in the United States. This picture, that's actually vodka that was being made illegally, being dumped out of a window. So that's kind of crazy. As far as economic, the 20s were a pretty good time for the economy. There were lots of department stores, people were buying lots of things, and there were they were starting to travel abroad, and there was just a lot of spending power and a lot of consumer goods for sale. JCPenney, by the way, was one of the first chain department stores to be invented. Macy's was actually the first department store, but JCPenney made all of their stores across the country the same. So it was kind of the first idea of that chain store like we're familiar with today, like JCPenney, Walmart, Target, where you can go into any store and they're pretty similar. The flapper, there were lots of changes in social values for especially women. Overall, the society was getting more casual, and the flapper was basically the idea of the new woman who was free of all of those Victorian constraints. So the flapper was sort of usually a younger woman who was more partying and dressing more fancy. We always think of them wearing fringe dresses, but that's actually not what they wore most of the time in the 1920s. But flappers were pretty much a younger person who was really embracing new freedoms for women, which goes along with this social changes in dress. Women started showing their legs for the first time ever. They still wore pantyhose, but they wore them that were flesh colored, so they looked like their legs, even though they weren't showing their real legs. Remember, during the Victorian era, it wasn't acceptable for women to wear makeup, and they started wearing makeup, both blush and red lipstick, which was very, it was not acceptable, remember, during the Victorian time. So even nice girls were wearing makeup, which was, new for the time. And then cutting their hair short. This was the first time that women cut their hair short on purpose since the French Revolution. Remember when they did that haircut la victime, where they cut their hair off to show that they were willing to be killed for their cause. So having short hair was actually very innovative, very new, and very kind of risque at the time. We also started to see movie stars as fashion influences. Lots of new technology in the 20s and the 30s, but we started having radio in the 20s, and then by the 40s there was TV shows that people could watch. Rayon was the first man-made fiber that was invented, and it was called artificial silk at first. So it was hard to know at that time if you were actually getting silk or if you were getting rayon, and they started eventually in the 60s they made labeling requirements so it was clear. Zippers were also invented, which were called hookless fasteners. They were started out on boots, so they were an industrial item. And then in the 30s, they started to be used in clothing by Madeline Vianney. And no, it's not Madeline Vianney. We'll talk about that in a minute. So lots of new technology. We start to get new fibers. Coco Chanel's biggest influence was during the 20s. Actually, she was new in the 20s. Her biggest influence was during the 60s, but she had a large influence on the more comfortable and more practical clothing for women. The car evolved from the 20s to the 50s and became very, very common, but it did change fashion. Skirts never got as long and as big as they had been before. People stopped carrying parasols and walking sticks because walking wasn't practical, and where do you put a parasol and a walking stick in a car? Think about trying to put your umbrella in your car. It's a pain. Wristwatches got more popular because they were easier to look at while driving, and cars made it easier for people to live outside of the city and still commute into work. So suburbs started to grow. So some of the notable clothing items for women, let's go, well, some of the notable clothing items, as I said before, it was a tubular shape, and we associate the 20s with kind of this flapper look that's fringe, and that was really kind of just really for just a very fancy occasion. Most of the clothes looked more like this, or they were more of this handkerchief style, with this kind of more flowy edges, and a lot of the clothes were actually more flowy and sheer, not really the fringe and beading that we think about. So this is the handkerchief style that was popular. So this is actually what was more prevalent than the actual sort of flapper look. But it was a very tubular silhouette, no waist indentation, no, kind of flat bust and chest was popular. So very boyish actually for the time, and very straight up and down, which is called the tubular silhouette. So let me hop over. This is the clutch coat that was on your PEST sheet. It was really just something you would wear when you were going out at night. You had to hold it shut, but most of the times they had fur on them, and fur was a very big status symbol. So they would have been for more wealthy people who could afford to have a practical jacket and a more impractical jacket. The raccoon coat that's actually, the picture is in the menswear part of the slides, but that was made out of raccoon fur, and men wore it to go to football games. It was popular to go to watch college football games, and girls would wear guys' coats as kind of like wearing someone's letter jacket or class ring is now. You would wear their raccoon coat to kind of show that you were liking each other. The robe de style, this was made by Lanvin, and this was a different type of evening wear that actually influenced more of the fashion in the 50s. So it looked different from the typical 1920s styles, and it was based off of the wide skirts from the Spanish guardafantia that we learned about before. So this was just one different style of evening wear, but the most common style of evening wear would have been more of this flapper type of look. And I believe those are the biggest things from the PEST sheet. The hairstyles were different. This is called the bob hairstyle, and the Marcel wave with tight waves in it was popular. This was called the Eton crop, which had this little kind of dip in it and bangs. So the bobby pin was invented, which is interesting. The bobby pin, actually, a hairpin stays open it doesn't close itself, and a bobby pin sort of snaps itself shut. So before the bobby pin was invented, only hairpins were around. And the cloche hat was just a new style of hat that fit more closely to the head. It was really just because people had shorter hair, so they were able to wear more tightly fitted hats. I'm gonna hop over to the PEST sheet so you can see, so we can look at that. So the PEST sheet, the flapper, is both political and social, because politically women had more rights and were able to express themselves more. They could vote, remember in 1919 that passed. So it was a social change in women's rights and women's freedoms and the way they were expressing themselves, but it was also kind of a political freedom to be able to express themselves. The robe de style was a type of evening wear, so it would be social. The clutch coat was kind of a status symbol, so it would be social. The raccoon coat was also definitely a status symbol, and it was worn for more social events, so it's social. Women's hair, again, social change in the way that women are able to express themselves. Somewhat political, I would say more social here. The cloche hat would be social and technology. It was a new type of hat. Oxford bags, let's jump back to men's clothes. Not a lot happened with menswear in the 20s, really, but pant legs did get really wide, and those were the Oxford bags. They were started out by college students, so that makes them social because they were started by a social group of college students. And they were also kind of political because they were covering up their knickerbockers with them, and they wanted to be able to take their pants off quickly without taking their shoes off so they could wear their knickerbockers, which were not allowed at school. They had to dress up to go to school. So they were kind of political because they were sort of breaking the rules, and they were social, but they did catch on widespread for men. So you can see that at the beginning of the 20s, pant legs were slimmer, and by the end they were more wide because of the Oxford bag trend. You can see multiple different evening wear. The tuxedo was still acceptable, white bow tie, black bow tie, or tie. Towards the end of the 20s, into the 30s, shoulders started to get more broad on men's suits. There's the raccoon coat that we already have talked about, so it was a social status symbol. And then the polo shirt is the next biggest thing. So the polo shirt is this. It was actually invented by a tennis player, and he made it the way he did. If you notice a polo shirt now, it's still longer in the back than in the front. The tail of it is a little longer. He actually did this on purpose so his shirt tail wouldn't come out of his pants while he was playing tennis. And then he also put the little alligator. That one doesn't have it, but he ended up putting the little alligator logo on it, and that was the first branded sportswear. So that's pretty significant. So the polo shirt is technology, and it is social because it was a more casual, acceptable style of shirt. So those are the big ideas from chapter 20. The 1920s, chapter 16, the 1920s. I just want to cover, we don't have to really look at these too much, but sportswear in the 30s. Sportswear started to get more popular in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I want you to know that sportswear is any type of casual wear. So it's not, when we see the word sport, we think of playing sports or athletics, but sportswear is just the general term for casual everyday clothing. So now we see terms like athletic wear, which would be things to wear while working out. So while doing yoga, while doing workouts, while playing basketball. But sportswear just means everyday casual clothing. So it's not a dress, it's not formal wear, it's not a suit that you would wear for a business occasion. It's just casual everyday clothing. So jeans, t-shirts, polo shirts, button-up casual shirts, pretty much most of the things that we wear on a daily basis, khaki pants, all of that is considered sportswear. And as people started to dress more casually, sportswear got more popular. Another big invention in the 30s was Lastex. Lastex made stretchy stuff. So Lastex was, it was actually made out of real rubber covered with cotton or a different fiber of yarn, and it made it able to be stretchy. The problem with Lastex was that real rubber actually gets brittle when you put it into swimsuits and things, and it was used for swimsuits and things. So real rubber will get brittle and break up over time. So nylon was also invented in the end of the 30s. It became really popular in the 40s, and it was the first synthetic fiber. Synthetic means that it's made from a petroleum or plastic-based substance. It was super popular because they were able to make pantyhose that were more stretchy, they were more resistant to runs and getting damaged, and they would last longer. They were more comfortable. So they were very, very popular, and women wore, that's why we call pantyhose sometimes nylons. You might hear older people call them that. Madeline Vianney invented the bias cut. The bias cut, it's hard to see it, but it is this diagonal lines in the dress that it's a way to make a dress fit more snugly without having stretch in it, because we still don't have spandex or anything that we can blend with other fibers like we do now. So this was very innovative. It's technology because it was a very innovative way just to cut fabric so that you could have more slim fitting silhouettes. And then Elsa Schiaparelli was the first designer to use zippers in clothing, not more industrial or boot uses. Okay, so we see the silhouettes of the 30s were much more slim, slender. We started to get a little bit more feminine lines again. having a little more of a waist indentation and less of that barrel silhouette that we were seeing in the 20s. This has lines all the way around it, so it's very, very slender. It has the bias cut. Boxer shorts were, those are just men's underwear that are kind of typical now, but they were worn by boxers, and that's where they came from. So they developed from social. They were also a new technology. The English drape suit was really just a more comfortable fitting, looser fitting suit for men. So that was more technology or social because it was more comfortable for social occasions. The zoot suit, that one was pretty significant because it was started by a subculture. It was one of the first styles to be started by a subculture. And at first it was kind of associated with maybe criminal activity, but then it became more of a common style. So, and then cowboy Western shirts were kind of just a new sportswear that were different that people could wear. Okay, so on to the 40s. The 40s, the big story here is World War II. World War II, it's important to remember that it started in Europe before it impacted the United States. So World War II was going on in Europe throughout the whole 40s, and the United States got involved in 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So World War II had a ton of influence on everything. It impacted the whole world, sort of like what we're going through now, but it impacted fashion a lot. So the L85 regulations, those were a set of restrictions that were based on cloth. So they basically were limiting the amount of cloth that you could use. And this is from Women's Wear Daily showing this. So women's skirts had to be more slim cut, so they didn't use as much fabric. They couldn't have extra pockets. They couldn't have double-breasted suit jackets, so like where they have 2 rows of buttons. So the L85 laws were all about saving fabric because the idea was that they wanted to be able to save as much fabric as possible to use for military uniforms. For men, they couldn't have cuffs on their trousers. You couldn't have extra pockets. Nylon had just gotten really popular for pantyhose, and all of a sudden it was not available anymore. They could only use nylon for military clothing. So women actually painted their legs with shoe polish to make it look like they had nylons or pantyhose on, even though they weren't able to wear them. They didn't want to go back to wearing the silk or rayon pantyhose because they weren't as comfortable, but you couldn't dare show your bare legs in public. So it was also wool was in short supply and rubber was in short supply. So it just impacted clothing in a lot of different ways. It impacted food. Food had to be rationed and everything. Shoes were rationed. Leather shoes were rationed. This is just an interesting picture from Europe of a gas-resistant baby cage. World War II also gave a chance for American designers to be recognized in the world. Really, European designers were the ones that were recognized as being good. So World War II gave American designers a chance to sort of shine and be focused on in magazines and things. So one of the biggest ones was Claire McCardell. And Claire McCardell, she throughout the 50s and 60s, she invented a lot of popular fashions. The Madras plaid that's in the next chapter was invented by her. The dirndl skirt, which is this big flowy swingy skirt, she actually invented that in the 50s. So it gave a chance for European designers were in the middle of a war zone, so they were unable to do anything. So American designers were able to shine, kind of. So that is kind of the big idea about that. World War II was a big deal. Teatro de la Mode, I forgot to delete it off of this one. It's actually more it goes along better with chapter 17, which is after World War II. So we'll talk about that in a second with that. Eisenhower jackets, it's basically any jacket that is short. So President Eisenhower was a very short person, and jackets were ending at the waist, and they were called Eisenhower jackets because he was so short. So they were for women and men, but any short jacket was called an Eisenhower jacket. So that would be political because they originated actually from military clothing, and they were named after a president. So their political influence. Sloppy Joes were for teenagers. So teenagers started to develop their own sort of fashion trends throughout the late 40s into the 50s. So that's social because they were mostly for teenagers. And then sunglasses and t-shirts, those are both originating from World War II. Sunglasses were invented by Ray-Ban for pilots during World War II so they could get the glare of the sun out of their eyes. And they also, t-shirts were worn by servicemen to make it more comfortable under their jackets. So t-shirts and sunglasses both are items of fashion that we can thank World War II for, and that would make them political and technology because they were new items. So I think those are the big ideas. Oh, the Hawaiian shirt, those also originated somewhat from World War II, and they're cross-cultural. So they could be political and social. So Hawaiian shirts actually were brought back from the Pacific by servicemen who were serving in World War II, and they became a very popular sportswear item for men. If you see like any 50s movie, and when they're wearing casual clothes at home, they'll have a Hawaiian shirt on. Elvis wore Hawaiian shirts a lot in a lot of his pictures and things. So Hawaiian shirts are both social and political because they came from World War II. So I hope this helped explain some things to you. If you missed anything in the notes, and hopefully it will help you with your test. I will see you later. Bye.